name's Nicole, and today I want to talk about 13 reasons why the adaptation that just got posted on Netflix the other night. I love the book. It's one of my all-time favorites. I read it when I was probably way too young to read it. I stole it from my sister. I mean, it's such a powerful, intense read, and I absolutely love it. So obviously when I heard that there was a TV show coming out, I jumped right on that. It is a Netflix original series produced by Selena Gomez, and just the cast is amazing. So this first part is going to be spoiler free, and then I will warn you guys when I'm going to get a little spoilery. So overall thoughts, it was so good. I totally binge watched it. I watched the first 2 episodes the night it came out, stayed up till like 2 a.m. for that, and then the next day I pretty much just went to class for I had like 2 or 3 hours worth of class, and then I just spent the rest of the day watching the series, and I was up till like 3 a.m. But so worth it. It's so good. It's a very faithful adaptation as to just like translating what's in the book to the screen, but they did add a lot of sort of extra supplemental things around the story in the book. I don't want to get too into detail right now as to what those things are, because this is the non-spoilery part, but I think that the things that they added were really a good contribution to the story. If you've read the book, you know it is very focused in on Clay and his experiences of listening to Hannah's tapes, his reactions, and really the only sides of the story you get are Hannah and Clay's, whereas in the TV show they zoom way out and slow things down. In the book, Clay doesn't really have a chance to talk to anyone about what's going on, about him listening to the tapes, because he listens to them all in one night. But in the TV show, he listens to them over the course of a few days, and so you get to see him react to the tapes a little bit more, and you get to see everyone else around him react to them, the other people who are on the tapes reacting to them and reacting to Clay listening to them. You get to see Clay talk to them about what's on their tapes, which is a really interesting thing that I think the book was missing. Don't get me wrong, I love the book, but I do think that this adds a lot of really interesting sort of extra context. In a lot of ways, it complicates the story, because it means you're not just getting Clay's point of view and you're not just getting Hannah's point of view. You're also getting, to some extent, the point of view of everyone else on the tapes. You're getting their side of the story, and they're not just the people who hurt Hannah anymore. They're real people now, and they have their reasons for doing what they did, and you know, you see them sort of process realizing how what they did affected Hannah. And I think it just added a lot to the story, and was sort of a reminder that all these people who Hannah's talking about, they're not just sort of one-dimensional villains. They're people, they're teenagers, they, made mistakes, and that doesn't mean that forever they're horrible people, with the exception of like 1, maybe 2 people. So that was sort of the biggest change from the book. There were a couple shifts in pacing and timing and just like order that I didn't really have a problem with. It was mostly to keep the flow going in a good way, and then they shifted the sort of emotional climax of the story a little bit, and it worked for me. I think that the series was magnificently acted. Hannah and Clay in particular were just amazing. I also really loved the actor for Alex. I found myself loving characters that I hated in the books, or just didn't really think about in the books. Characters like Alex and Zach. I didn't really think too much about them in the books. They were, they had their tapes and then we moved on, and I ended up loving them. But yeah, overall they stayed really faithful to the book. The series handles some really difficult issues, and I think it handled them really well. It doesn't shy away from these difficult things that these teenagers are facing. It doesn't try and gloss over them or make them look, cool or glamorous or even just less bad. It shows how horrible they are, and it doesn't sort of apologize for that. And I really appreciate that. I feel like a lot of times in media for teenagers and young adults, horrible things are glossed over. If they depict them, they are a lot of times toned down. They're made to be PG-13, and that's not how life is, and it feels really respectful to the people who go through these things, that they didn't shy away from them and they didn't pretend like they don't happen. I do want to give a huge trigger warning. The entire series talks a lot about suicide and self-harm, and episode 9 on also talks a lot about sexual assault. Episodes 9 and 12 in particular have fairly graphic depictions of sexual assault, and then those scenes are sort of flashbacked a couple times throughout the rest of the episodes. And then episode 13 has very graphic depictions of suicide. So just be aware of those going in. They are there. I think that they're handled really well. I think that they're talked about really well, but they are there and they are fairly graphic. So I think that's all I have to say. Spoiler free. I really, really loved it. I think it did complete justice to the book, and I think it added a lot to the book. Like I said, I do love the book, and this does not change how much I love the book. I think that the Netflix TV show is sort of supplemental material to the book, and I really, really love that. So I'm gonna go a little spoilery now. So if you have not seen the Netflix series, go watch it. It's amazing. It's only 13 episodes long, so go watch it. It's amazing. And then come back once you're ready to talk spoilers. Alright, so for spoilery stuff, I want to talk about some of the changes that they made. Obviously, there's sort of the big change of zooming out and seeing the rest of the people on the tapes, how they're reacting to it, but first I want to talk about the changes that they made to the specific book content. So I reread the book right before starting watching the series, so it would be fresh in my mind. The first sort of major thing they changed was Tony revealed himself early. In the book, he doesn't reveal himself as the person who has the tapes until Clay is on his tape, and they sort of listen to it together in a similar way that they did in the show. I think that it makes sense that he revealed himself early in the sort of cinematic adaptation, because in the book we spend so much time in Clay's head, and that's how we hear most of his reactions to it. And having Tony there, first of all, it added another plot point of people sort of interacting with Tony and being frustrated with him not telling them things, but then also it gave Clay a bit of a sounding board to sort of talk about his feelings in regards to the tapes too, which I think is really good, because like I said, we can't be as in his head as we are in the book. The second major change that they made was they flipped Alex and Jessica's stories. In the books, Alex's story comes first and then Jessica's. This is sort of a minor thing in my mind. I think it makes sense for pacing. I, while reading the book, always found it weird that Alex's story came before Jessica's, because chronologically Jessica's story came first, although the sort of issue with Jessica only arose because of Alex. It's a weird thing that they're so like they're happening simultaneously, kind of. So I think it makes sense to switch them. I think it would have made sense to leave them. It doesn't really bother me either way. The next major change they made was to Courtney's plotline. In the book, pretty much the extent of Courtney's plotline is that she was, a sweet, popular girl. She went over to Hannah's house to help her catch the stalker, and instead of getting drunk and making out with each other, they stayed sort of on plan the entire time and posed some sort of sexy back rub photos before exposing him. And then once you got to Courtney's tape, she basically realized that since she had just kind of stopped talking to Hannah after that, Hannah didn't really like her and that wasn't good for her reputation, so she had Hannah go with her to a party, but like basically only as her chauffeur, and that pissed Hannah off. So that was pretty much the extent of Courtney's tape in the books, and in this one, in the adaptation, they added this whole queer plotline, which I loved. Don't get me wrong, I did not like Courtney. She was kind of a bitch, but I do love the added representation. They added so much representation on this, guys. It was great. But they added this queer plotline to Courtney's, which I feel like gives her so much more motivation. So it makes her actions make more sense. It makes sense now why she stopped talking to Hannah instead of just like not talking to her just because she's kind of obnoxious. She stopped talking to her because she was scared and because she didn't want to be outed. And it also makes what she did to Hannah, the sort of bad thing that she did to get on the tapes, more intense. Because in the book, it's basically just she was kind of a fake person who used Hannah for a ride instead of like as an actual friend, which like is a douchey thing to do, but it's not like this super dramatic moment. And I think they added that into the show to make more be at stake for her instead of just she's kind of fake, which, like, let's be real, probably everyone knew anyway. And then the next major things, they shuffled the order of sort of Clay's tape, Justin's second tape, and Sherry's tape. So in the book, it's Clay's first, then Justin's, then Sherry's. And they moved Clay's to the end of after Sherry's, which I found interesting because it shuffled up the timeline a bit, but I think it made sense. It gave the series a really good sort of emotional climax at that moment. It really made things build up really well to Clay's tape, which I always felt like in the book we may have gotten a bit too early. So I actually really liked this change. And the final sort of big change from the book that they made was in Bryce's tape. So in the book, Hannah is not at the party. She's sort of walking by after the party's over, and it's like Bryce, Courtney, and like maybe one other person. They're hanging out in Courtney's hot tub because it's at Courtney's house this time. And she joins them, she gets in the hot tub, and she's obviously in an emotional wreck at that point, and she is just falling apart, and she lets Bryce finger her. And it's not like a good sex positive moment. It is an awful moment. She is absolutely torn apart. She's so broken at that point that she just gives into her reputation. Whereas in the show, she sort of stumbles upon Bryce's party at his house and he ends up raping her, which is a much more, it's a lot more intense and it's a lot more emotional. I remember I was watching the sort of behind the scenes thing that they have on Netflix, and they talked about why they filmed that the way that they did, why they filmed both her and Jessica's rapes the way that they did, and talking about how the script actually said, you know, we stay on Hannah's face for longer than is comfortable. And I think the way that they were done was really well done. It doesn't minimize what happened, and it focuses not on the sexual assault itself being committed, but on how it's affecting these girls. And I think that was a great choice for them to do, because like that's what's really important both to the story and in general. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that being a change that they made. I think it heightens the sort of drama of the story. I think it gives Clay more of a motive to go after Bryce, which he doesn't do in the book. In the book, he just passes the tapes along to the next person, which in the book that would be Sherry, and it just sort of, the cycle goes on. There isn't a big resolution. The tapes don't get out in the book. It's kind of heartbreaking in a way. It's one of those things, I think I understand why they did it. I'm just not sure how I feel about it. Going into the, you know, tapes getting out and all that stuff, the supplemental material, because in the book it's, like I said earlier, it's very focused in on Clay, on how he's reacting. He listens to them all in one night and then passes them on, and that's all we see. And in the TV show we get so much more. We get seeing everyone else's reactions to knowing Clay has the tapes. And it complicates things, because now all of a sudden these people aren't just the villains in Hannah's story. They're people, they're teenagers, and a lot of them just were kind of just generally assholes, and they made stupid mistakes, and now they're realizing that that behavior has consequences. It's hard to see. You know, this adaptation made me love characters that I, like I said earlier, didn't really think about. Sorry, I had to go do a thing and I'm back now. Anyway, as I was saying, it makes you realize that with characters like Marcus, I'm not going to pretend he's this stand-up guy, that he didn't do anything wrong, but at the end of the day, he was just kind of a generic high school douchebag. And like, the way he treated Hannah wasn't okay, but he's not a Batman villain. He's a person, and he may not have even realized that what he was doing was so hurtful to her. With like Zach, what he did was stupid and petty, but it was born out of his own insecurity. You know, at the end of the day, these people they're just teenagers, and I think it's really important to show that, and I love that the TV show showed us that and gave us that extra context that we didn't get in the books. I also think showing things like Jessica's plotline, showing the after effects of something like a sexual assault, is really, really important. It's not just something that happens and then, you know, you move on with your life and get over it, or that happens and then, like Hannah, you know, she falls apart after it and ends up ending her own life. You know, this is something that it stays with you, and you know, it affected Jessica in such a powerful way, and it showed how she didn't want to talk about it, not because, you know, she didn't care, not because she didn't want Bryce to, like, I don't know, face punishment for it, but because she was scared, and it was genuinely just so difficult for her to even get the words out. And then when it comes to the plotline with Hannah's parents, the whole trial, I have to say a lot of the time I found myself kind of frustrated with them, being like, you know, your child just died and you're so focused on suing someone. Like, is that really productive? But on the other hand, the more we got into it, the more I kind of understood, like, this wasn't about getting money from the school. This was about making sure that they do things so that this doesn't happen to anyone else, making sure that they're held accountable for their bad behavior, just like everyone else on the tapes. And I think one of the most stark differences between the book and the TV show in regards to that is the fact that Clay doesn't just pass on the tapes to the next person. He finishes the tapes. He gets the confession from Bryce. He gives the tapes to the next person, but he also tells them, like, what you do with this is your choice. And the copy of the tapes get passed on to Hannah's parents, and people find out about them. People confess. People feel guilty. There is some form of justice, or at least it looks like there will be some form of justice being served, more than just Hannah making people feel guilty. I think that the TV show feels like a more complete story. It feels like a more finished story, whereas the book felt like sort of this is a horrible thing that happened, and one of the most horrible things about it is that life just goes on afterwards. The tapes get passed on, and Clay is just sort of in this limbo of, like, what do you do next? What do you do after something like that? And I think that the TV show gives it a more complete, sort of finished feel. And then I think also Alex's plotline, which shook me to my very core. At the end of episode 12, when they said, teenage boy shot in the head, I was so scared. I didn't know. I mean, I had sort of my mental list of who had access to guns. Alex never really crossed my mind. I mean, it makes sense that there would be guns in the house, but because his dad's a cop, but I suppose I think that's one of the points. I mean, that Hannah was saying that, you know, you might be looking for signs, and the signs are, it looks like nothing, and it's hard to see it. And with Alex, I mean, obviously we saw that he was feeling absolutely horrifically guilty. Out of everyone, he probably showed his guilt the most, showed how horribly he felt for what he did to Hannah the most. And yet it never even occurred to me that he would do something like that he would hurt himself. I think it's interesting that they said that he's in critical condition in the hospital and not that he's dead. I think it gives a little sliver of hope, which I appreciate. I think it's not important just to show not just how the people on the tapes affected Hannah, but how Hannah's suicide affected them, affected the people around her, affected her parents, her family, her friends, to the point where, I mean, if you watch the sort of behind the scenes thing, they talk about how a lot of times one suicide inspires another. And it's a very real thing that happens. You know, Alex felt so guilty about driving Hannah in that direction that he couldn't handle it. And I think it's one of those things that it's hard to watch, but it's really honest about, you know, how these things work, how these things happen. A lot of times it's not an easy show to watch. It is hard, and it's scary, and it's too honest at times. But I also think it's really important that we talk about these things, that we talk about why a kid would be driven to hurt themselves like that, and what we can do to stop it, what we can do to help. So yeah, overall I think it was a really, really good adaptation. The parts from the books stayed really faithful to the books, and they added this whole other side of things that did so much, and I think served a really, really important purpose, and I love it. I could not stop watching. I was in tears for like an hour after I finished. I also think it's really important, if you're gonna watch it, watch the sort of behind the scenes, because I think it gives a lot of really important information. It talks a lot about why they made certain choices that I think is really, really good to know, good to understand. So yeah, as an adaptation, I think it is absolutely phenomenal. I think it's a very important thing to have in our society right now, and I think it's something that can teach a lot while also being a very just truthful piece of art. But yeah, I'm curious as to what you guys think, so please let's talk about it in the comments. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions, what you think of some of the changes they made, what you wish they'd done differently, whatever. Let me know in the comments. I love you, and I will see you later.